Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm Ben from Universal Audio. Welcome back. It's Monday the 4th, which some people say it's a holiday. I don't know, Drew. Tom? You guys know? Is today like a special day?
Oh no!
You know what it is.
No, I'm not one of those.
What is it? I've missed the memo.
Come on,
dude,
Tom.
It's May 4th. May the 4th be with you.
Oh, of course it is.
It's
Sorry.
Star Wars Day.
Wait, we haven't got masks or anything.
I know we totally dropped the ball on doing any sort of.
You're doing your best.
But hey, Ben, your headphones kind of do look like Princess Leia a little bit.
There we go.
Yeah.
So
the beard's Chewbacca and the headphones are Leia. He's halfway there. He's the whole cast. It's a one-man show.
Oh my god,
loving it. You got a lightsaber hanging in that guitar rack at the back there.
I mean, yeah, exactly.
Skywalker too, man.
Where do you think all that blue light comes from? That's my lightsaber I just stash up there. You know,
it's the Millennium Falcon landing in your back of your house.
Nice. Well, it's a wonderful Monday. It's bright and shiny over here. Great day to stay indoors, just like we have been for weeks now. But we're also coming up, guys. We're almost to like the 1 month of Luna being out there and 1 month of doing the show every single day. This is incredible.
Tomorrow, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
1 month anniversary.
Which is super cool. And we've had a lot of people who've actually stuck in and watched all of these with us. So shout out to all you guys, all the day one Luna office hours folks. We really appreciate you guys tuning in and hanging out with us so much. This week is going to be super fun. So today we're going to be answering a few of the questions we didn't get to last week. Some of the big ones like analog summing and gain staging inside of Luna. Two very popular and highly requested questions. We're going to kind of dive pretty deep on those here with Drew and Tom. But in the meantime, if you guys have new questions, again, just hit them up in the chat. We'll keep an eye on it. We'll answer as many of those as we possibly can throughout the day. But this week, we've got a really great lineup. Tomorrow afternoon, Fab is coming back for another Tales from the Switch, where he's going to be showing us how he's converting himself and his sessions from working inside of Pro Tools to working inside of Luna, and allowing all of us to kind of join in that journey. So that's going to be really great tomorrow afternoon. And then Wednesday, we've got Shakir King coming on. And we're going to be stepping through, kind of talking through the final mix session for the Cass McCombs song, Wine on Lebanon. That's also being released on Wednesday. And this is the very first Luna session that you guys will be able to download, open up, see all of Shakir's settings, and yeah, kind of really explore what a professionally recorded Luna session looks and sounds like. So that's gonna be it's gonna be fun hanging out with him again. We did this at NAMM a couple times. We got up on stage and got to kind of talk through the tracking session. But since then, we recorded some strings, we did some more background vocals, and then you did the final mix. So there's a lot to talk about there. And then Thursday we've got Terry Lewis from Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. Oh man, that one's gonna be so much fun. So yeah, we're hanging out with him on Thursday afternoon, and then we'll be back Friday for more Q&As. So yeah, it's gonna be a super fun week of office hours. And again, we're not here just to talk to ourselves. We're here to talk and hang out with you guys. So questions, comments, ideas, feedback.
But Ben, we got one in the chat right here from Troy asking about the Luna office hours, and will any of this content be available in the future? Do you plan on kind of taking snippets from this or what?
Yeah, so all the office hours, contrary to what we typically do for our live streams, usually with a live stream we try to emphasize the live part of the live stream. So like the NAMM show, if you try and go looking for them, you may not find them unless you look really, really hard. but for office hours, we've decided to keep all of these up and available as resources. So we're cataloging, kind of going back one session at a time and adding in timestamps and adding a little bit more descriptions to kind of help point people to various aspects. But even more importantly, if you guys hopefully have already watched all of the Luna Basics videos, right when you open up the app, there's 4 Luna Basics videos sitting right there. And Matt, who's been part of the Office Hour crew here as well, he's been scripting and creating those videos along with our content team here at UA. So there's those 4. We just released a 5th one, which is more about the downloading, installing, and getting going with Luna. So presumably, if you're watching this show, you've done that step. But there's a couple more kind of basics videos that are coming out in that series, and then more importantly, we're starting work on a bunch more of the advanced topics. So we're taking top here in the office hours and kind of bundling those up into smaller. So keep an eye out for those coming in the next month or 2. So yeah, there's going to be lots of great Luna content. And of course, if you guys haven't already checked it out, there's an incredible playlist that we've put up on YouTube called Luna User Videos. And these are a bunch of great reviews and how-to videos that other channels across the internet have made about Luna. So, there's like Sound on Sound, Vintage King, Pure Mix, too many names to remember, but some of my favorite ones in there, you'll quickly see in the middle of that playlist, all of a sudden there's a big chunk of like very similar looking thumbnails. So the Studio Rats, who we've actually had, we had Paul on
Paul Drew. Yeah,
Paul Drew, two first names. We had him here on Office Hours to show off the song that him and his buddies made as part of that series, which is really cool to see. And speaking of Luna sessions, they shared that session file with all of us here at the Office Hours, didn't they, Tom?
They did. Yeah, you can go download it.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you find the YouTube video for that session, the link will be in the chat. So you should still be able to scan through that chat real quick and look for that. Look for a u.audio.com/something link, and you'll be able to get those files.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm just checking it just to be sure before I say anything. You can just go u.audio/Luna sessions and get straight to it.
Good.
And it will take you to a Dropbox where you can get the folder, download the session.
Fantastic. Yeah, and it'll be cool too. The Cass McCombs Shakir one, we're stepping up another notch off of there, and you'll actually be able to download that from within the app, which is really cool to see. So yeah, I look forward to.
And that has actually Jakir's mix in it, right? That's different. The Studio Rats one is just the raw file for you to do your own mix with no plugins, no bussing, no effects. But the Jakir one is legitimately his mix, right? Isn't it, Ben?
Mm-hmm, exactly. It's his final mix file. And of course, we always know that some people have various amounts of DSP on their system. So what we're going to offer is there's going to be the full fat, the session, the one that he created, and then we'll also do some trimmed down ones that are some of the stuff exported and committed into the session. So that way people with lighter like a quad or a smaller system than what Shakir has will still be able to open it and kind of enjoy those tracks and hear the final product. So yeah, that's gonna be super fun.
That's amazing. Yeah, is it worth re-mentioning as well that if anyone downloads those Studio Rat stems and does a mix and shares it online, then we're still looking out for content being made, right? And we have some prizes we do selectively give away. So we have to remind people, share your Luna content and your Luna songs with us. We're gonna keep our eyes peeled for them, right?
Yeah. Well, and on that same topic, there's don't forget about the Real World remix contest that we have going on right now too. So Real World Records are hosting a remix contest where you can download the stems. You can even download them in Luna format if you like. It's a great way to kind of test drive Luna as a music production tool and try out some of the new sounds inside of Shape. But yeah, that remix competition, not only can you do it for fun and learning, but the first prize winner gets a Apollo X8. And then there's an Apollo X4 for second place and a Twin X for third place. So like
that's crazy.
It's
insane.
It's
and I know there's a lot of downloads already, but we want to see a lot more. We've had a number of submissions coming in, quite a few, but people keep them rolling in. And if you just go to realworldrecords.com/remix, that's one way to get to it. Then you can go and you'll get a landing page. You got a sign up form. It tells you a bit about the vision for the song and what it actually means. So I hope people take time to read about the band's vision for it, because it's actually it's really a protest song about feminine rights or female rights in Africa. So it's like definitely something you should go check out and maybe use that as an inspiration for your remix. So yeah, realworldrecords.com/remix, and then yeah, win some crazy Apollo prizes, right, Ben?
Really cool prizes, man. I mean, isn't it? It's really fun, man. Like, as unfun as this situation is overall in the world right now, like it is giving us all this opportunity to create and explore, especially Luna. It's like this is a perfect time to be learning a new piece of software, really kind of getting into this workflow. And I even discovered that myself. Like, when we're not doing these shows on the weekends, I actually get a chance to sit in there and work on projects. And it's like this weekend I was playing some bass for a buddy's cover video that he's doing, and being able to just like pull in their tracks, pull up, put up my Ampeg into a 175, 176, and have that come back into my headphones. Like, it's such a good experience. Like having that great sound quality coming back to you instantly. You get immediately spoiled with great sounds.
Yeah.
Does that mean we're going to see your face on a montage YouTube video with Ben playing bass in
absolutely
in a square somewhere?
I'm gonna be a little square. Doing my best to not solo. No.
You wearing shades in the video.
And really, it's funny, like you said, Ben, like what we're doing, none of this would exist, had we done the normal typical launch. So it's kind of, it's a bad thing. Like you said, it's a bad situation overall, but you take the good, you make lemonade when you're giving lemons,
Yeah. I don't think we've even mentioned it really, but Office Hours as a concept, Ben, came from you about a week before we started doing it, something like that, or less. And we figured out all the tech to get going and everything.
Yep.
But literally probably 2 or 3 weeks before that, you were still knee deep in a completely different event, a completely different plan.
Fully different idea. Much more similar to what we do at like NAMM or we did last year for the Twin X and Apollo X4 launch of some kind of more of a one-time event sort of thing. So this quick pivot into daily shows and again, it's had a side benefit of creating such a great sense of community and it's really fun seeing like how hanging out with you guys in the chat, answering as many questions as we can, but then also seeing all the Office Hour homies in there answering each other's questions and helping each other out. Man, you don't get that with a one-off event. You get that by being here every day and hanging out with you guys. So
it's a pleasure, right? It's so much fun. And then this week alone, when you're just reading out the names coming on, it's like this is an epic week. And we're is this week 5? I've lost track.
This is technically week 5. This is week 5.
It's 5. Yeah, 5. 5 makes sense.
Count, yeah.
That's crazy though, right? From a 1 day potentially to we're 5 weeks in. We don't even know what day it is, but we still got cool people coming on talking lots about Luna. And even last week we were dropping feature bombs on like the simple stereo panner and
I know
we're still recording tracks at the same time.
I have a couple more. I have a couple more up my sleeves.
Oh man, dude,
I'm holding onto a couple.
Well, and
it's time.
And also I'm gonna start the teasing of so this week is this week is really big. Next week is going to be even bigger. I can't say anything more until next week is actually happening. But the stuff that's on deck for next week, it's gonna be a surprise to everybody. And I think it's gonna be it's gonna be so much fun. We're gonna go back to doing a few extra shows because we got a little something fun to share with you guys. So I've already said too much. But great. So
shut it down.
I know, right? So let's keep on hitting us with the questions in the chat. If anything good comes up, we'll check in on that. But Drew, I know you've got a really cool example that a lot of people have been asking to see, which is analog summing using Luna.
Yeah. So this is something. Let me go ahead and share my screen. This is something that I've been seeing a lot of chatter about. And I guess we should, right off the bat say that, technically speaking, it's not a supported, configuration. And that's because Luna's, all of its analog IO are not quite, they're not all delay compensated just yet. But with it's doable. It's totally doable. And with a little bit of a workaround, you can make it happen. So I have a quick little demonstration for you here. First thing I want to do is just show you briefly. This is my patch bay labeling that I just
I love a patch bay diagram. I'm proper excited then. Sorry. Like nerdy. Mine are like color coded like yours. It's like,
Is it not the best part about making a studio is making your patch bay labels and layouts?
So
God,
this
yeah,
is
yeah.
so yeah, man. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Tom. I'm glad I did this. So I
I've
just thought
wired
it'd be
thousands of bays, like
yeah.
bay points over my life. So yeah, it's quite nice to see.
So this is just the Excel spreadsheet that you use to make your patch bay labels, and I just thought it would be helpful to kick this conversation off by showing this. My configuration is two X8Ps and an X16, and the way I have it configured, this is kind of like I like to call this is patchless summing, right? So utilizing patch bays and the normaling feature. And if you're not familiar with what normaling is, it's basically a connection between the top row and the bottom row that you have control over. In the particular patch bays I have, there's little dip switches so that you can switch between full normaled, half normaled, or non-normaled. And basically, depending on what you're doing, mic lines or effects or outboard gear, you might want it in a different configuration. I don't want to get into that. I guess right now is not. That's a rabbit hole we don't want to go down. But anyway,
it is a great way for being able to work with analog hardware, right? So that you can insert between the output of your interface and the input of your summing bus. That's like that's a great opportunity to add in analog EQs and compressors.
Yeah,
and that's speaking personally, that's how my summing setup is majority of those normals have a piece of outboard in between the interface and the summing, and then a few of them are left clean as well.
Yeah, right. So what Ben's referring to is what I show in my patch bay is a pure clean summing, patchless summing. So I can have the 16 outputs of the X8Ps that are normal to the Burl B32, and if I so desire to insert analog gear, I would patch it in at this point. What Ben's saying is some of his outputs he has normal to the gear, and then the outs of the gear to the inputs of the summing. So you really can kind of
minimize buying patch cables then.
Yeah,
exactly.
Number one. Yeah. Also, I mean, for anyone who's not got a patch bay, I always like to describe that as it's like a waterfall, right? So the water kind of goes from the top down. And I think a lot of people, when they start building them, probably would think ins over outs, because logically that's like reading left to right.
Yeah.
But patch bays really are upside down in that sense, just outs on top and ins on the bottom. You can go, the normals will carry down on the patch bay generally, especially if you have half normaling.
Exactly.
So, it saves you from having to have a rat's nest as your default configuration.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Without normals, you would wind up having to create a point-to-point connection between every single piece of gear that you wanted to be, your standard configuration. So in my case, in my case, we could talk about patch bays the whole episode. So in my particular case, I have it, mine's a, quote unquote commercial studio, semi-commercial studio. So my setup needs to be like sort of like default and clean. And then I accommodate if you have like a more personal studio, then you can normal things the way you want. But the way mine are set up, it's the 16 outs into the Burl. And then up here, you can see that the Burl out 1 and 2 are normal to the X16 input 1 and 2. So in this configuration, I don't have to do any patching in order to sum. By the way, to the right of the Burl out, you can see API, Dakin, GTQ. These are also some other analog outboard pre's that I have normal to the X16, and they get their signal from the mic panel in the studio. So, you can just plug into the studio. It automatically is normal to the X16, and you're good to go.
Totally off topic. What is GTQ?
Oh, that's an Aurora Audio GTQ2, which Jeff Tanner, who's used to work at Neve, Tom, I'm sure knows him. He's a guy that he has a company called Aurora Audio. He moved to LA 100 years ago, and that's a GTQ2.
He's gonna love that 100-year comment.
I didn't mean it that way. I just meant he's been in LA for a while.
He's only 150 years old, but it's one of the wizards.
It's a great
of
box. Yeah, it's a great box. I've had it for I've had the Dakings. I've had that GTQ in my rack powered up for 20 years, and they're just like workhorse boxes. Anyway, so that's I figured I'd start with that to just show you that. Now, the way that translates into Luna is I have a simple little setup here. Well, first of all, if I want to go everywhere, I can go to the IO matrix, and you can see that I've got the outputs of my second unit there. And the way that turns into the session is, and I just did a simple example. You can do however elaborately you'd like, but I just kept it really simple. I just did an 8-channel summing for this particular demo. And as you can see, I've got the drums going to the first pair of outputs. So if you click on the output of this channel, you can see that it's just going to be line output 1 and 2. Super simple. The bass is actually comprised of a regular channel and then a dirt channel. So I put them to the same output. Guitar, I did the guitar group and their effects. Just kept it really simple. And same with the vocals. So it's a simple 8-channel summing. They all go out to the Burl unit via the patch bay, and they go through the summing. By the way, I always run the Burl with the +6 switches in and the BX5 transformers in. Not much point in doing it otherwise.
I was like, yeah, when in Rome,
Yeah. And then, so here's the return channel. So I just have this called sum return, and its input is, of course, that normal, the first two inputs, the Burl return that I have labeled in my patch bay. And the one thing you do have to do is you have to keep the sum return on input, right?
Yep.
So that's part of our ARM accelerated real-time monitoring. And you want to solo safe it, which is right-clicking and coming down here and selecting solo safe. That ensures that as you solo elements, the return of the sum won't be
won't accidentally get muted.
It won't accidentally get muted.
And it's really fun. I mean, it's coming from the world of Pro Tools, where you end up having to specify what things you want to be solo saved all across your session. So like if you solo your kick drum and your drum buses aren't solo saved, you don't hear them. So
Right.
Luna's kind of added some smart logic behind the scenes that if you solo up your kick drum, it'll automatically solo the kick buses. But since this one's a return track, it's not linked to any of those other tracks. So
Right.
Luna won't know by default, hey, okay, I need to make sure that this track never gets muted when I go to solo any of my other tracks. So this is definitely like the most important use of having solo safe is as a return.
Yeah. And furthermore, as you can see, again, evidence of the accelerated real-time monitoring, you can see that the first 4 inserts of this sum return are available to be hosting DSP plugins. So you could monitor your sum return with a limiter just to see how it's going to react, even though you're not printing with it. These would be in the monitor path.
Yep.
Of course, you could put effects. You could put, processing in the record effects of your return path, which is kind of like, you can go back in time because you're doing analog summing. You're doing analog summing, but you're also doing record effects and all that stuff.
But
that's so powerful, right?
Yeah.
Well, and those monitor inserts are a great spot to put in something like a peak limiter, or especially if you want to, be mixing at a reasonable level. If you're shooting for like -18 or -16 LUFS, like giving yourself plenty of headroom, but you also want to be able to audition at the same time what is -12 and -10, and those higher LUFS rates, rather than having to commit to you don't want to print necessarily that big peak limited one. You could throw something like the precision limiter or the Oxford limiter there, and then be monitoring through that peak limiter all in real time.
Yeah, right. So yeah, very, very, very handy. So so let me just show you, let me just play you a little bit, because there is the one trick I'd mentioned. Like there's a little trick you have to be careful with here, because as you can imagine, there are different plugins on different tracks that are feeding these various outputs. And so therefore they will likely have different latencies. And, like I'd mentioned earlier, Luna's not quite set up to do the full delay compensation on all the analog IO, but it does compensate for the monitor out, the main output, and the cues. So you might have noticed in my session, even though it's not part of what we're listening to at all, on the main output, I have put the ATR 102. It's on there, and it is processing stuff. And in fact, it needs to be on and actually processing, because then it reports its latency to Luna, and this now becomes the most latent output, and therefore Luna will compensate the others to that. So that's kind of the trick, and I'm actually going to show you what happens if you don't do that, right?
Yeah.
Just to be clear then, Drew, that blue track, which is printing your mix, that's feeding the red main, right?
Yeah, right. So yeah,
if you bounced when you're finished and you printed your sum mix, if you bounced the main mix out of Luna, then you're going to get your mix going through the ATR 102.
Exactly. Yeah, you absolutely would, which could be a desirable thing, could be what you want, or you might want to bypass that once you've done the print, but you do want the plugin to be there and be active until you do your print.
I think it's just interesting to bring it up, because if we're talking about peak limiters, I'd probably run one after the 102 and then use the inserts on the blue track for things like mix bus EQ or compression. The
difference there,
hanging around in the high volume stuff.
Yeah, the difference there is that while the track is in input mode, in other words, live while you're monitoring it, you wouldn't hear that because it's disconnected from that bus.
It's going straight to your monitor, left or right.
Yeah,
so you would have to drag that limiter from the blue track to the red track if you wanted to put it at the end of your chain.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is real time, and it's DSP only plugins. This, of course, is DSP and AU, but only for everything that's feeding it, which this would do upon playback, right?
Well, and also just to put a little pin in this and something to come back to here. There's probably like 2 or 3 different ways to do your final exporting once you've captured a summed, once you've happy with your mix and you've printed it back into the session. There's actually a couple. These are 2 ways that we're talking about that are ways to get it out, but there's actually a third one that I think we should touch on once we kind of get back to wrapping up and how do you take a finished summed mix.
Cool. Yeah. So let me finish. I'll finish this part of my demo, which is to just kind of drive home the importance of this trick and what it is. So I've got a little example here of a little three piece punk rock band doing their thing and getting kind of wild and getting kind of crazy. And so let me just play it for you here, coming into the outro of this song. She got me paying with my blood. I'm tearing my heart and burning my eyes. She got me paying with my blood. I'm paying with my blood. So let me do this. Let me, so these guys are getting kind of raucous. They're getting kind of crazy. And in order to drive this home, I'm going to actually mute the guitars. I'm sorry, mute the vocals and just get the drums and bass going here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit play again, and then I'm going to bypass this plugin, and you're going to see the drummer and bass player will start to sound like they don't know how to play together, right? It almost turns the beat around. So be careful. So I'm gonna start with it on, and when I turn it off, you'll see what happens. So you see there, what was actually happening was the moment I turned on, the ATR 102, it induced enough latency on the master fader for Luna to go ahead and do its thing and to compensate. And
it was a wild roller coaster ride right there. Of like,
yeah,
like the minute you turn it off, my head turns sideways. I'm like, what is life? But then as soon as you turn it on, then it lines everything back up and your groove is locked again. Because that's everyone's biggest concern with doing processing like this is delay compensation has to be rock solid. It has to, you have to be able to deliver back to your clients what they recorded and gave to you. So actually, Drew, do you mind just sharing your screen?
Sure.
Let's show people how to capture and export. So if you've done your whole mix, you've summed it together, you have your sum return track.
You want me to go ahead and hit record some of that?
Yep, go ahead and hit record.
Okay.
So this is me.
She got me paying with my blood. I'm tearing my heart and burning my eyes. She got me paying with my blood. I'm paying with my blood.
Just pretend we did the whole song, I guess.
So what's really cool about this workflow too is, as you see, since we're capturing the mix back into the session, this means that you can use versions, so you can keep track of mix revisions and always come back and listen to other versions of your mix by using the version control system inside for that one track.
Right, I could call this.
Yeah, I do that all the time with my rig, and sometimes I even get tricksy and I'll turn the transformers off for one part of the song and then in on a chorus or something.
Yeah,
and edit between the versions. A couple of different.
Yeah, because sometimes the analog stuff, you want the beginning to start off clean, and then you want the chorus to hit harder or like be more saturated in that sense.
Yeah, you can do all sorts of fun stuff like that. I remember reading there was a Bruno Mars track where they'd like switch between 3 different bus compressors for different parts of the song for different feeling, right? You could kind of have them all set up and just print the mixes and then comp them and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. So I renamed that V1. I just named that first pass or something. Nice. The cool thing about that, of course, is that as you did more and more, like I know when working with clients is, they'll send me notes, they'll send me revision notes and mix notes. And one of the things I always want to do when I'm mixing is I want to compare, did I address the note, right? So if they were saying, if they were saying something about the bottom end being a little bit X, Y, or Z, then being able to switch quickly between these versions while printing the mix, it allows me to A/B very quickly. So that's
So for getting this out of Luna, the typical way that you would do it, you would do Option Command B,
right.
And so when this is in input, I don't think I haven't tested this for myself, but I think you have to take it out of input before you do the bounce.
Seems logical,
right?
Yeah.
Small thing there, by the way. I just want to bring this up. When you've got the bounce dialog open, the fact you can still do stuff in your session, and you don't have to escape out of the bounce dialogue.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Love it.
It's the little
Small
thing.
things, people.
It's the little things. So like right now, it would process that blue track, would be also sending through the main. So now it's getting processed by that ATR 102 or any other effects that you would have on your main
Yeah.
fader.
If I had, including more summing, if
You
you
can
so
add even more
inclined,
something, exactly. So you got to be aware of this. So like you haven't been listening to that ATR 102 the whole time you've been mixing. What you're listening to is the output of that blue track, but it's been skipping over the main fader. So it's important to be really aware of what's going on in your main fader before you do a bounce this way. But the other thing you can do is, Tom, if you click on the sources, instead of bouncing from the main track, what you can do is you can select that just your sum return track. And what that'll do is it will export just the output of that track without the without the main fader or the main bus effects on it.
Well, if I wanted to do that, Ben, all I would Command Shift K is export clips as files.
Exactly.
Too.
And
Was that what you're going to do?
This was number
Okay.
3. Exactly. So
Oh,
this
sorry.
is
Sorry.
exactly, because the bouncing the disc on this thing, the one thing that this does preserve, if you do it this way, it will process through any effects that are on that track. So earlier when we had it in input monitor, we were we were talking about how we could put a peak limiter on that blue track. So if you wanted to monitor through it at +6 or add any other kind of post summing effects, then doing it this way, it would bounce what you've been listening to as is, without adding without adding the 102 or whatever else you put on the main fader. But then the third way is Command Shift K, or right clicking on the clip, and you'll see an export clip option. And what this allows you to do, this allows you to take just literally the clip. Like what you see here right there, the WAV file version of that allows you to just export that as is. Or you can change the sample rate and file type if you want to. But this is this is the absolute quickest way to do it. And as you can see, Drew, you can select other files to export this way. This is a lot. I know some people have been asking about this, of like, how do I export just a clip off the timeline? Command Shift K, or right click on a clip and you get export, and those will take just those clips and save them as WAV files or AIFF or AAC files anywhere that you like.
Yeah,
There's
that's
also
super
an
handy.
export clip button in the workflow panel for the timeline at the top.
And as well as up here, export clips as files or somewhere up here.
Well, yeah, and if you go to the, in the workflow menu, Drew, where if you pop down, right now you're in the sort of mix one, but if you go to the edit timeline, that one, export clip button right underneath on the right, top right.
Right, clip right there.
There it is.
That's the one.
There's always like
It's about 4 ways of doing it.
There's so many different ways of doing it, but yeah, it's really, again, to stress the point of like, something's not fully supported yet. So what we just showed you here is kind of the workaround that works reliably. So this does work. There's just that one little caveat of like making sure you have a very latent plugin on your main fader, and then just be aware that everything on your sum return is going straight to your monitors and not actually being processed by that ATR 102. You're gonna use the sum return track in input with it solo saved. Super critical for being able to do your mixes. Then you press record a pass of your mix. You can create new versions, and then Command Shift K to export that, or Option Shift B, or Option Command B to pull up the regular mix down, and then either choose the main, in which case it will process through the 102 or whatever else you have on the main fader, or come in here and select just your sum return track and bounce that, so that you get any of the monitor effects that you had integrated on your sum return.
While we're here, while I'm in this window, one quick little pro tip I loved, that I don't know about you guys, but I find that I'm mixing far more in the mix window with Luna. And because of this little feature in that record, in the mix workflow drop down, we have this little miniature universe view. So it's like, I don't know, but like Luna's mixer is so compelling and so visually, like I love it so much. And the ability to navigate up here is super handy. Like I find myself doing that way more, whereas in Pro Tools I never look at the mix window. I do everything in the edit window. That's an interesting little difference in workflow, you know, as far
Yeah.
as the way I find myself working differently in Luna than I would
Yeah.
otherwise.
Well, and I love
I
too
have
how
one-
you, I love
sorry,
how
guys.
you naturally added. You know, you're combining. We're talking about analog summing here, but you're taking advantage of the Neve summing at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
By kind of busting tracks together in the box before going out of the box. You know, you can pick
Yeah.
and choose. You know, you dial in just the right amount of Neve color that you get, and then you know on top of that you're getting the burl color. And for a rock track like this, it's just you can pile on as much color as you want, and it'll take it.
And here's, this is something I stumbled on, during development, where it's like, here's Capital Chambers on a bus with Neve summing. It's like as if Capital Chambers couldn't get to sound any better, and yet it kind of does. Like
Oh, totally.
you can actually add, you can make Capital Chambers more aggressive. You can, I find myself putting Neve summing on all of my effects returns, even my vocal effects. Here it is on Echo Boy. Here it is on this 140 plate. I find myself putting it on all of them.
I love how you're
another
able
layer.
like on that plate one, you've got it cranked. You're fuzzing it out. You're getting the Neve full effect of Neve on there, and I'm sure it sounds actually pretty driven, but kind of driving that bus and then hitting it into the reverb. You're kind of influencing the color of that reverb now.
That's an old school trick that they used to call, and I'm not that old, but like they called it like banging the plate. Like I remember Bob Olson from Motown, who's a guy I've learned a lot of over the years, learned a lot from over the years. I believe that's the phrase that they used to use back in the day, banging the plate, they called it, which was just like gritting up the send to the plate,
That's cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
No, it's cool. I was more thinking out loud. My mouth opened before it should have. If ARM is off and you're an input monitor on that blue track,
what happens?
Because therefore it's not using the DSP monitoring path, right?
I think so.
Correct,
so it'll now start passing through the main fader. I know that.
So if you want to mix through that ATR 102, that would be one way of doing it. But does that retain the delay comp?
Let's find out.
Yeah.
She said, "Meet me."
I'm gonna go with no.
That was a quick no on that one.
Yeah. Did you guys get it?
She said, "Meet me."
Oh yeah, you can hear you can hear some phasey comb weirdness.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm gonna go
So
with no.
final point there then is if you're doing this, make sure you're in ARM mode.
Yeah.
She said, "Meet me."
Yeah.
But and then
That was funny.
that plugin on that master fader, it is literally only there as a delay offset, right?
Exactly,
And
yeah.
There are. We have? I probably shouldn't say this now, but we used to have there was a very old UA plugin I remember a very long time ago. There was like a delay plugin, like a sample delay plugin. And I guess we've got rid of it. It was like a U81 thing. We don't have that anymore.
Yeah, I guess not.
Well, and the other thing I was thinking of there with turning the arm, arm on and off. Yeah, you gotta make sure you keep it in arm, and that kind of keeps everything all lined up. There was one other thing I wanted, just popped in and out of my brain really fast. Oh yeah, Drew, what's this Pultec HLF? I've seen that in my plugins list before, but I've for whatever reason I go right past it into the EQP 1A.
Oh yeah, this one is one I love. Like you guys, you might have seen. I think you commented on it before, but I'm a huge fan of EQP 1As, and I do something. I do something that apparently I've seen some people have commented on. Apparently, it's a little unusual, but it seems normal to me. And that is that I in fact my preset is basically this as a starting point, which is to just attenuate all the bottom end, and then at around 4 to 4.1 is actually quote unquote like sort of halfway unity gain back in putting the bottom end back, which seems counterintuitive, but if you know how the Pultec works, it's basically a peaking type filter on the cut and a shelf on the boost. And I tend to do it a lot at 30 hertz, which shifts all of those frequencies down. And by the way, yeah, this is lead vocals. I'm boosting 30 hertz on a lead vocal, right? Doesn't seem to make sense, but I don't care. It sounds good. So what I do in addition to that, in order to keep from overblowing the bottom end is, and again, this doesn't make a lot of sense logically, but I don't care. I just do what I do, and what it sounds good. It sounds good. So what I do is I pre-shave off some bottom end, knowing that I'm going to blow it back up afterwards. And and it's a way of like focusing and tightening the bottom end. So this kind of doesn't look like it makes sense, but I like it, and it sounds good
Well,
to me. So,
and I think a lot of people who maybe have the Pultec EQ collection, you know, they're used to seeing the EQP1A and going straight for that, or even the MEQ5, like, you know, the go-tos. But this HLF, it's a total sleeper. It's a really musical, really gentle, high and low pass cutoff. So it allows you to just tame your tops and bottoms in a really cool, kind of colorful way.
Yeah, I use
And
it.
it goes
I
to
use it a
2K
lot.
on the high pass, so it does the telephone sort of vocal cuts.
1.5, yeah, it does 1.5. Yeah, so that's you can totally get the telephone effect with this guy down to 2 or 1.5 and come all the way up to 100, and you instant like legit retro kind of sound. And in this for this vocal, I went super retro and did the 175, which if you haven't, the 175, 176 collection, by the way, if you don't have them, like just check them out. They're
use
insane.
use that 14-day free demo because they sound so good.
They're so good. They're definitely must-haves. And the 175 in particular is crazy gritty and spitty and dirty. And you can see I'm hitting it pretty hard here, and these vocals are like just trying to get that really aggressive, sort of spitty vocal sound, but while taming some top end as well. So
Oh, so my mind has totally been jogged because I went back to check the comments. So someone was asking if other external processing could follow the same sort of process. And absolutely, we've had a lot of people kind of asking about, like, say you want to run your whole mix through, like an external SSL compressor or EQ. Yeah. If you just want to process just your mix bus using analog equipment, you can kind of almost follow the same thing. Instead of splitting into multiple outputs like what Drew's done here, you can actually just send this all to line 1, 2. Run through your analog gear, come back in on line 1, 2, or 3, 4. It doesn't matter which ones it comes back in on, but you would set up exactly the same as this, but instead of spreading it out to 8 different outputs, you would just go to 1. You'd just be feeding one output.
And since it's your main pair, you don't have to worry about delay compensation. Yeah,
that's the even nicer part about that is then keeping things aligned is no longer an issue. And it's a great way to integrate, especially even if you have a twin, you can integrate analog hardware in real time. And of course, you can do this on I've seen people do this on individual tracks, like they'll quote unquote reamp like their bass by running it out into a hardware 1176 and then pulling it back in, or running things back out through stomp boxes. I've done that a bunch of times where, like, you'll send some vocals or send some crazy stuff out through a reamp box, through some pedals, and then record the result back in.
What I typically do then is, what I'll do in those situations is I'll put a little square wave. If you put a little square wave on the source track and record it through the loop through with like the pedals bypassed or whatever, you can get the delay comp number out of that by looking at the resulting where it's placed, and then do a manual compensation if need be.
Yeah,
so square waves are good for that.
And that's kind of the nice thing about being able to recording the return of any of this sort of like analog processing is it allows you to commit to it. So it allows you to do it once, and then especially if you're doing the reamping kind of thing, be able to capture the sound, and then it's with your mix from now on. So I know a lot of guys that kind of run that sort of workflow where they do their mix, do some analog stuff, print, and then commit all of the analog, and then from then on they just do all the revisions inside the box.
Yeah, that's just smart. That's just working smarter. You want to, it's just like mastering engineers do the same thing. Tom knows, like, you're going to capture that analog chain, because if the client wants it a half a dB louder, you don't want to have to recall the analog chain. You just want to be able to pull up the analog print and go a little heavier on the limiter,
Yeah. And if you capture that with some headroom as well, you're not clipping really hard or anything. Then if you need to, I don't know, cut 0.5 of a dB at 500 or whatever it is to tweak it, you can do that afterwards in the box with a very, very clean digital EQ and still hit the same limits. So smallest revisions, even like mid-side stuff, you can do a lot if you don't ruin the print coming back in, and then you don't have to go all the way back to square one, which I think is true for even like effects processing and stuff. For printing vocals or whatever, you can always print 3 or 4 versions into a version in Luna. Take one where it's completely greased in distortion, take one where it's a bit backed off, print them, and then move on, and you can edit between them, do stuff. You can kind of give yourself like rollback points just by working quickly and printing, committing to sounds, I think.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, all right. So this is what people have been waiting for, man. A good deep dive into analog summing and integrating analog gear into Luna.
For unsupported features, we talked a lot about it, and it all worked, right? It's funny.
That's great. Cool. So Tom, I know you've got some gains. You're gonna lay some knowledge on us about gain staging and metering and how that all works together inside of Luna.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were asking about sort of how to hit the Neve and the tape. So I thought we'd start off by having a look at those. So shall I go ahead and share screen here and we'll get
please.
into it. So let me also just send audio to you and stop Drews.
What a beautiful looking session you've made here. Wow, that looks like pure music.
I know, I'm really into the sine wave music sources. Yeah, loving it.
Man, it's a whole new genre called test tone wave. It's it's too cool. You haven't heard of it yet, but it's coming.
No, exactly. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave my main mix muted, and I'm not actually going to let you listen to test tone for ages because that would just be horrendously painful. And also, I'm muting it from my own headphones. But what I've got here is 50 hertz, 100 hertz, 1K, 5K, 10K, and some pink and white noise. So they're all on tracks. I've just rendered out, as you can see here, I've rendered out some audio files. I've actually dropped them. They were printed out at -1 dBFS, which is the peak level of the wave. So if you think about a sine wave, the top of the peak, the top of the little mountain, that is at -1 dBFS. So like 1 dB below clipping on a 24-bit file. And then I've knocked it back to -11 because that is actually where 0VU hits on a lot of our things in Luna. But I thought first up, we'd have a look at tape. So if I hit play, you're going to see all these tones coming up. So the pink and white noise are down here at around -20 RMS. So they're a much lower thing. So it's something to do with just how I wanted to show off what we could do with noise, you know, and how you think about noise in your sessions. Like not everything is completely
the level it says it is not necessarily the level you hear it at, right?
Well, you know, you have a lot of incoherent sources, I should say, that are, you know, they don't relate to each other musically or in pitch sometimes. So like they're not going to sum together and like make things super loud, which is more like random noise summation. But then when you've got things like test tones where they're exactly at, you know, there's energy at exact frequencies, when you combine them, you're going to see doublings in level. But what's kind of interesting, if we focus on those first four, so let me just forget about those two that are down.
Which kind of wish you had post fader metering on right now. I was joking.
Yeah, well, it's on pre for a reason, actually.
Let's not get in there.
I know.
One day we're going to have a battle royal, a metering battle.
At least visually, like those two faders that are down, don't worry about them right now. But these five up front, so 50, 100, 1K, 5K, 10K. If we have a look here, they're all sat at, let me check with my eyes. Yeah, -12 dBFS, which is the -1 plus the 11 that I've taken off it here, right? So that is exactly what you'd expect to see. The metering in Luna on the faders here is perfect peak metering, and it's showing us the peak level of those sine waves at -12, right? Simples. If we turn on the tapes, have a look at where these meters sit.
They're not all the same. How is that possible?
Yeah. So first up, some people are going to think, oh, well, what's going on here? Well, this is obviously the fact that tape has a frequency response. So we're seeing an increase down here at 50 hertz. And then we've got, you know, in this case, a little bit of a dip at 100, a bit of a scoop, you know, as it's going towards the top. This is really what's happening in the machine. So if we go over here and, for example, let's change the speed of the tape machine, you see all the levels on the meters change. And now we've got completely different frequency response. So if you're not used to sort of working with tape, be aware that tape itself has a huge frequency response. So on a console, when you would be calibrating, you would always check at least 101 and 10K. Some consoles had a 50, which was great. In fact, 50 was better, and certainly over here in the UK, because you could start to look at where the head bump of the tape machine was relating to mains frequency hum. Like,
because you guys do 50 and we do 60, right?
Yeah, because we have different mains frequencies. That's why if you're on a tape machine like Oxide and you'll see some of the presets that have NAB alignment on there, that's more of an American alignment where it's centered, the sort of the machine set up to work better if you have 60 hertz hum pickup in your studio. Whereas over here, some of the CCIR alignments, more of the European types, would be based around 50 hertz, trying to avoid having lots of hum picked up by just what's happening in the studio. Anyway, so the thing to think about really is just, when you're trying to hit tape correctly, where is correctly? Well, it depends on what's going into it first up, right?
Yep.
If you've got big 808 kick drums, you might see you're pushing that needle far harder than something that's a snappy snare or a hi-hat, because the frequency response to the machine is going to be different. But what's pretty interesting here is, like, if we look at what's on the track, I know Fab was mentioning this with you, Ben, using the gain function on the clips when you get a session to mix, to be able to kind of like hit tape cleanly, let's say, if you're sort of around this level,
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of dropping it a couple of extra dBs. We're not really pushing the tape to 0 in this position,
Yeah.
we're kind of just sat below. But let me put it back on 15. So yeah, we're on 15. So that's like traditional music recording,
Mm-hmm.
and it's come up.
Kind of hitting it in the clean
Right,
spot. So and that's really that's the purpose of us having the VU meters on every one of these, right? Is you want to be able to quickly have a visual indication of where you're coming in on the tape machine. Are you if you're always in the red, you're gonna hear it, feel it, but this gives you the visual feedback of what's going on, as opposed to like coming into it on a little bit lower. You're going to be in a much more linear part of the tape.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
Tom mentioned the dynamics. Like this is something that I see people getting confused about. They'll see a kick drum that has a big initial transient and a big attack, and yet they'll not see that VU meter moving into the tape. And
Mm-hmm.
that's perfectly normal. That's by design. Is like because that transient tape, the meter is reading the average amplitude. It's not reading that peak. So
Yeah.
you can have a kick drum that looks like it's got a big transient, and it won't necessarily drive that meter crazy. But yet, as Tom mentioned, an 808 kick with a ton of bottom end will drive that meter. So it's a perceptual energy. VU meters are more about the energy, and they take into account frequency. They're not pure level meters. So
Well, yeah, mostly because they were designed to read speech, or they only really work on sine waves and such. But when they're complex waves with transient information, they have a very particular damping ballistic, so that they don't bounce around when the needles, like a magnetic bounce, where as it actually moves in the magnetic field, the coil causes the needle to move. If that kind of just hit the end and then just flicked around and was really ringy, you wouldn't get any true reading, because it would just be like trying to
It would just be
read one of
bouncing
those little
all
dog
the
tugs
time.
that bounces in the back of your car.
Well, what
You know
are
what I
they-
mean? Like, which way is north? I don't know, because I'm shaking the compass right now.
and they're what,
You know,
300
that vibe.
milliseconds, Tom? I think 300 milliseconds is typical VU meter response time, if I'm not mistaken.
There's a traditional vintage specification, and then there's like what people make these days. In most gear, you find they have things that look like VU meters but approximate. They don't match the original Darson Val spec for a VU, but they're really slow compared to like a peak meter.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting. In Luna, we've got on the faders in the bar graphs in the green here by the fader itself, that's peak, and obviously showing you the peak level of that that sine wave or that transient or that kick drum. But the VUs are going to be like moving more musically, and also because of the energy that sort of exists in longer sustaining bass notes versus short transients, you're going to find it I find it where sometimes that tape needle isn't moving much on a hi-hat or an overhead mic, but on a kick drum it's like moving pretty hard. And that's going to happen. But it's also, and why I wanted to show this with the split tones, is it's going to happen because of the frequency response of tape, because it kind of does a bump as you get to the low end due to the head gap of the actual magnetic head of the machine, the way it's kind of tuned. It's like a resonance, and you can see it here. It's like the 50 is getting kicked up beyond everything else. But to put it into context here, we've always said, like, when you're recording, if you record in with say 10, 15 dB of headroom on the peak metering on your actual fader meter, when you hit playback on your session for that particular track, you're going to be in the mid range, at least here, sort of like 100 hertz to 5K. You're going to see that you're hitting 0 VU roughly. And that's actually, I think, Drew, you mentioned it to me before we started the setup for today, but it's minus 12 dBFS seems to put the VU meters to about 0, but not for all frequencies because of the machine frequency response.
Right.
So that's why you'll also see the offsets on these meters here, because interesting enough, even though this is muted or I pull this, because I'm on pre-fader metering, and all the tape is happening well before the meter anyway, even if you toggle between pre or post fader metering, you will see an increase in certain energies at certain frequencies coming off tape. So the thing for me is, like, if you aim for, this much headroom at least in recording, you should be able to find that you can go in and out of tape distortion with the saturation knob and be in a really nice sweet spot. And then if you wish to go up and really push them hard for effect, you can obviously start to come up to say there, a couple of extra decibels, and you're going to be
starting to really heating it up.
Yeah, but we're still keeping a good amount of headroom on each track. Right?
Yeah, and it's in an interesting way. Luna's actually, and that the tape extension in general is kind of, you can literally learn it'll influence how you record moving forward. You'll literally learn that certain sounds you want to bring them in at a given level because of the way they're going to react with the tape, and so you actually can adjust your workflows to sort of fit. So it's almost like this is teaching you in a weird sort of way.
Yeah, and the fact that, like I say, depending on the calibration you have of some of this stuff is like internally compensated in our algorithm, but depending on the speed of the machine, the tape formulation, you'll see, again, you can see changes in the needles there. So this is actually a cool way for you to like look at.
The repro settings will affect this as well, right?
And that's where it gets huge, because you still have, for example, the ability, and this is what I was showing the other day when we made that beat, and I said, I want to make it sound like an old sample. And I said, if you underbias the tape machine, you know, you see that level rise, and then as I keep coming back, it should starts to
fall,
start to drop away. So the thing with biasing a machine is you've got this kind of bell curve, and you kind of want to be, the highest point of output level is not where you generally bias the machine. You generally go over a bit. So when people say like 3 over or 6 over, they're talking about coming down the other side of the hilltop. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
So you'd be here, and that is actually probably calibrated in a typical overbias. But you can if you keep going with overbias, you lose top end, and you actually lose level. So there's a point where you can extract more dirt out of the tape machine by pushing it harder, or you can deliberately shut down the way you get energy onto tape, which is what I did on that beat we made, where I made the sort of string sound like they were coming from an old broken vinyl.
Yeah.
Because they're basically just getting trashed in noise by not going to like well biased tape, you know. So you've got that kind of stuff, but you've also got EQ settings for, like Ben's mentioning here, for the repro. So if you want to trim some low end out of the tape machine, you can do it with this little LF trim pot. And this is what everyone had to go through every morning when they aligned the tape machine.
Isn't it? It's so beautiful.
You don't have to worry about it.
You don't have to worry about it. You can pull up a preset for it. You can boot the session, and you get back to the sound immediately. But you know, I hope everyone that's watching this right now is kind of appreciating the fact that like the amount of the way the real world tape machines work has been translated into how the tape extensions in Luna work. Like everything, the response curves, the way they saturate, it's not just it's not like an IR. It's not like it just processes through it and it, you know, changes the tone curve and adds a little dirt. It's, you know, the modeling, the depth of the model that they did on this, it's absolutely insane. Exactly. Yeah. It's so true to how these machines actually worked. That, you know, all the different characteristics are preserved, and it's really
and
cool.
Don't be afraid to mess around with them. You can always, you know, I know there's a lot of knobs and a lot of switches there, but you can always just option click to return it to its default. So have fun with it, play around with it, see what it does to the sound. And then if you feel like you've gotten, you know, it's gotten away from you, you can just option click and get right back to the default.
And it's so great too, having all those preset. Like the Studio is definitely one of those plugins that I'm a heavy preset user, and you can just browse through different presets and, you know, really kind of audition a bunch of different things, because it's such a wide range of tonalities that you can get out of one extension.
It's like wheeling in a different tape machine without having to wait. It's really cool.
Yeah, it is.
And you know, I often find like on bass, like a lot of really heavy bassy type of sounds, I may well back this off, but you know, the saturation knob here, because of the fact that head bump's going to kick in, you know. But then on like HF sounds, I often find, like on hi-hats and stuff, I find I'm
really want to soften it up.
Really getting in there. Exactly. Yeah. And then of course, if you get into it too, we have individual controls. So I showed the global controls for biasing the machine, but you still have with the Studio 800 extension the ability to do this per track. So if I just wanted to take that kick drum that was a bit bloated and trim it, I can do that. It's like trimming one track on the machine, but of course could be multiple tracks across your session. And, you know, in this case, I've actually used Machine C as an example right here. But if we look at the audio that I'll play later, there's a bunch of other machines running with different settings on them already. So there's that, you know, flexibility in Luna, which is just unreal, to be honest.
Absolutely. And be careful. Those do adhere to selection grouping. So if I've had people tell me that, hey, the individual controls are still doing everything, and you know, that's something you got to make sure you have your tracks deselected.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I thought we could look at is kind of what happens when you start feeding tracks into, say, a bus, right? So this is I've got 2 buses created just over here. Let me move Zoom for a sec. Just get you guys over the other side or in the middle. And there we go. And so I've just loaded up a FabFilter EQ because it's got a really good FFT in it. So I'm looking at this with 120 dB of dynamic range, which is pretty epic, to be honest. It's not far off of Audio Precision or some decent analyzer in that sense. And then I've created a mono bus here and a stereo bus just to show what happens with regards to pan law and also what the Neve's going to do. So if I just bring up the 1K test tone here. So this is this Pro Q showing us that nice pure 1K tone going straight in. And this is going to the mix bus. You'll notice that was at -12 ish. Let me put it back exactly to -12 in the waveform. So you can see here a bunch of sine waves. And I know that 11 right now is the sine. So that's going to put us bang on 12 here and here on the mono. You'll notice that on the stereo bus, it's not, it's down. Even if I turn this Neve off here, you can see it's lower. The reason for that is pan law. So when you're in the middle on the pan pot, and that's how any console generally works, because we're sending that to 2 buses, that's going to come out of 2 physical outputs, and in this case, 2 speakers. And when those 2 things combine and you hear them, they sum and get louder. And when they're coming from speakers, you generally like look at what they call constant power, so 3 decibels. So if we go all the way left, you'll see that the signal actually goes up in the stereo side and down in the mono bus that it's feeding. So that's how you can visualize pan law, is like to make it sound the same volume when it's coming out of 1 speaker as it is 2. They have to have a curve to it.
Interesting.
Right?
And
they're not all the same. They're not
exactly.
all.
Not all consoles do it the same way, right?
Yeah, I mean, 3 is constant power. Then you've got 6, which is constant voltage, which is a big drop. And I don't think anyone's actually really done a console like that in a very, very long time. No one likes hearing that because generally listening to speakers, it's acoustic summation, not voltage summation. But there are a few console manufacturers that did 4.5, and they'd sit in the middle to try and split the difference between constant power, constant voltage. But fortunately, Luna's 3, and the Neve consoles that we've emulated with the Neve summing are also 3 dB. So the pan law is the same whether you're hitting a Neve bus or whether it's just a regular. You can see here.
Yeah,
even though the scale's changing.
Yeah, that's a good thing. You wouldn't want those relationships to change as you turned it on and off.
Yeah, exactly. That's then not going to make your mix suddenly like change pan position effectively and left to right balances and that kind of thing. So the other thing is like feeding a mono track to a mono bus. Here you can see a nice clean sine wave. If we stick Neve summing on here, just at the default, you can see that we're hitting 0 on the VU, as Drew says. That's -12 dBFS on the faders down here, going into a bus at -12, and we're perfectly at 0 for the Neve. The tape isn't actually fully 0 at -12 because of the fact the tape's got such an unusual lumpy frequency response. So you're kind of around that area, plus or minus a few dB based off the tape settings. But the Neve is really predictable when you turn it on. And what's interesting, you can see all the harmonics that's added just by going into the Neve right now. It's just full of juicy good stuff.
Well, and it's cool. Well, it's also cool to just real quick to make sure people are understanding when you're saying because -12 dB FS is that peak level. So what these VU meters, both on the Neve and the Studer, are both showing you, those are showing you an RMS or a dB VU readout. So that's why they don't respond as fast as the peak meters, and they're it's a much more musical movement. But that's why there's a weird the conversion of where these things are. It's just important to know that peak is your absolute ceiling of a value, and these meters are helping showing you the more RMS or a little bit closer to human hearing style metering.
Yeah, and I mean on a sine wave, the difference between the peak, the top of the shape, and the average level is roughly about 3 dB or 70% is the average level. But like a square wave, which just goes on and off top to bottom, there is no difference between, say, the average and the peak level, unless most square waves aren't fully perfect. So there will be, but theoretically not. And so when you actually think about music, which has got bunches of different sine waves in it and harmonics and all kinds of interesting stuff, like it's a bit all bets are off, quite frankly, which is why we always say use your ears, not your eyes.
Yep.
But the beautiful thing about a VU is it's a bit, how do I put this? It's just a bit lazy. And so it kind of it's like helping you not overreact.
Exactly.
Which is why I like them, and I have a pair right in front of me. And, I can tell on a mix, if you watch it and the kick drums are just lifting maybe 3 or 4 dB more than the rest of the track, and the snare too, that you're kind of in a really good spot for average level to where your kicks need to be.
Yeah.
And it's just something you learn when you look at VUs. So I really would, say, go listen to just like one of your favorite mixes, just go and bring a stereo track in and send it to a Neve bus and just watch that VU. And if you need to bring the track down to hit it perfectly around 0 and then see it just bounce a couple dB, then you'll really start to learn what they need to look like if you're not used to one. If you're like, as old as Jeff Tanner, then you were born before You know, it was invented. No,
I'm gonna get a nasty email. All right.
Love you, Jeff.
yeah. But VUs are so old, but they're such a great technology because they almost approximate the ear in terms of its kind of like dynamic response a little bit. I mean, not quite, but
yeah. Just so everybody knows, like if VU meters had stayed in use, the loudness wars wouldn't have happened, right?
Mhm.
People
Yeah.
who crushing mixes wouldn't have happened,
Mhm.
if you look at them on VU meters.
yeah, probably not. So like to finally show this, Ben, because I asked you, I think was, what way does this control work? Just so people are aware.
Yeah.
When you've got less headroom, that means you've got more clipping. So there's more harmonic content when this control is left.
Mhm.
And then to the right here, you'll see the harmonics chill out and they drop it to a very, very low level. I mean, anything sub 100
Yeah.
in this case, or 90 dB below the signal ish, is what I'd class as pretty clean audio performance, for a piece of what is effectively a piece of analog, a line amplifier with a lot of stuff in it.
Yeah.
But then up here, you're sort of seeing all that, that saturation.
Mhm.
And then you've got the trim control, which lets you regain stage your bus, And when we go to low Z, it's just a very similar story. It's just going to make more of an impact on, say, your low frequency stuff, down at 50. They're not great FFTs down really low, but you can see the sort of harmonics that go.
Come
And
on.
the way that they're like, there's like more higher partials with that. So I don't want to get too nerdy with that kind of stuff, and people will probably try this anyway. When they need to. Let's go back to this one. I thought it was interesting to just kind of show the alignment of levels and what happens with pan law, and also what's happening, between feeding a mono bus and a stereo bus with the same source. And if you see here again on the meter, we're down.
That's exactly
almost
3.
perfectly at -3.
It was almost exactly 3 dB down.
So that shows you the difference between like mono and then pan law on a stereo track, basically. So that's kind of that. And then I thought, well, why not have a look at like how I've gain staged a mix to effectively try and hit most of those things without pushing them too far into the red, and still not my main mix bus output. Because something that I mentioned to Drew earlier is, we were talking about, say, 16-bit audio or 16-bit mixing, a long time ago. You'd have had about 96 dB of dynamic range. The last bit debatable depending on the quality of converter. And then when we went to 24-bit recording, that it's almost 6 decibels per bit in those types of worlds. So you end up about 144 dB of dynamic range, which it still exceeds a lot of A to D and D to A converters in 24-bit recording. And when you factor in things like tape machines, like the hiss level that will be coming out of the studio with the noise switch on, you're probably only going to get 80, 90, or 80 probably.
Yeah.
90 is almost impossible on tape machine. It's probably broken. But, 75, 80, 85 dB of dynamic range, below the sort of real heavy saturation point, max signal level, and down to noise. So when we get into 32-bit, which is what Luna's running inside, and its floating point, it effectively exponentially increases the amount of decibels you can produce inside because of the way it rounds up the number. And it actually works out to something ludicrous like over 1500 dB.
Yeah.
You can kind of have
you would never be able to
numbers.
ever totally take advantage of.
Yeah, exactly. And you can have much, much smaller numbers and much, much higher numbers than, say, 24-bit. So you can end up going into, at least like 700 dB or something stupid. And, I'm sure Dave Berners is sat there going, whoa, boy, because he knows the real maths, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But the reality is it's way more than 24-bit. That's the number one like takeaway from why we do everything 32-bit float inside Luna for mixing. But of course, when you hit your main mix fader here, and you might have a plugin on here that is processing in a different way, you need to make sure you're not actually clipping that fixed 24-bit output if you bounce your mix in 24 bits, right? If you go, as we were showing with Drew earlier, if we go here and bounce out at 24, which is quite standard, procedure, then clipping that would be the problem. So I know Fab, in his examples with you, was creating a pre-master fader so he could pull down everything feeding his final fader.
Yep.
So he could have Neve on there and gain stage how he hit that thing without pushing beyond sort of the 24-bit limit, right? So that's one way you could do it. But the other way, and I know a lot of people will do this, is either record well, without being stupidly hard.
There's that.
Thanks.
There is that.
Great tip, Tom. And with that, easy solution. Just record really well, and then you're good.
Well, it's actually, this is coming from Drew from earlier, but when I say record well,
no, my point was this, Tom, because what I was talking about was there's people out there that have this misconception that you're supposed to record each individual track as hot as you can without clipping. And then come mix, they then wind up having to clip
bring
gain
everything
everything down. It's
Mhm.
like just don't do that in the first place. Don't record with limiters. Don't
Yeah.
for God's sakes, don't print limiters,
Mhm.
and don't don't feel like you've got to chew up all that headroom during the
That
recording.
was a
So
was a
that's-
myth from back in the 12 and 16-bit days when
Yeah,
you
right.
kind of did need to like make more advanced, like Tom was mentioning, when you only had 90 or less dB of headroom. Yeah, it made a little bit more sense to get closer, but with 24-bit converters, there's no need to tempt fate by possibly clipping. When you can just as easily come in at a very reasonable level and give yourself the flexibility later on.
Yeah, and it doesn't help that like a lot of loop libraries are printed within an inch of their life, and VI's output 0 dBFS.
So
it's
loud.
like,
They come
of
out
course,
so loud.
yeah, it's like the deck is stacked against you. So
Yeah,
But that's
yeah,
where
and I'm not
clip gain
implying.
is always your friend.
yeah,
Oh, I mean, I use it stacks, which is why, like, I thought making the comment about record well is just a bit of it's like slightly. It sparked debate. It was deliberately put in, but I actually tend to record more hot than I need to because I just like gain. I don't know, like analog gear
What,
sounds good when
louder
you
sounds
push it.
better? Who would have thought?
Yeah, exactly. But even like analog gear, if you're tracking through or unison preamps and you want to push them,
Mhm.
then it's fine. Do whatever you want creatively, and you could clip gain afterwards and then hit things fine. Or I think Fab's way was actually great because he's kind of saying, well, you've got so much headroom in the channels. Feel free, push your plugins to where they sound best, and then just use some tapering at the bottleneck point and get yourself out clean. And I think that's also a really valid workflow. And I find myself often like pushing things in the box more than I think, because some plugins sound better when you hit them hard. Not necessarily UA plugins, but some of the other ones I use, they kind of have a particular sweet spot. So it's really difficult to give you. I know people have been asking, like, what do I do? How do I gain stage? It's kind of like you have to listen. You can see just one tape Lunar extension changing the frequency response and the gain by 2 or 3 dB. 2 or 3 dB in a mix is like, it's like turning the vocal up and making it 1,000 dB louder. It's just like it's a huge
Night
value.
and day. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I know it sounds obvious. Listen, but if you record to where I'm showing with these test tone generators, say like -12, -15 peak level, I think generally you'll hit tape pretty well. And certainly when you start to bring up things like our 1176 plugins, you'll find that you'll be able to turn the input gain up well and get useful control over the compressor. But if you are hot, one of the things I wanted to show, people may have missed this, we have these teeny little HR trimmers in quite a few plugins. In the case of the Distressor, it's here, and you can actually basically move the model up and down.
Move the sweet spot up. Yep.
And I kind of wish these were on everyone's plugins, not just UA's, because if you could then record much cooler and then bring the gear down to where it sounds best, then this whole discussion changes. But for now, like when you're using our stuff, the trimmer's on the API 2500, it's on the Fairchild, it's on the Distressor, it's on some other stuff, and also we now have a headroom control HR on the Neve summing, which I know a few people asked, what does HR stand for? It's headroom, and that's what it's doing in our plugins as well as in these kind of summing stages. So, I mean, be hot or use clip gain.
Yep. The
or
world is
use
your oyster.
Extra buses. Yeah. And then like by the time Drew's subgrouping into the Neves and then hitting summing externally, you've got such a complex gain stage going on. You got to listen to it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
But so what I've got with this track here, just to sort of just to get the point across, let's just mute up all these test tones so they don't lurk around, and then I'll just play this for everyone, and you can see where things are sitting on the meters, and then I'll show you. It's all just going to subgroups, and you can have a look at these Neves here. So it's a track with Rabir we did where we covered a JT tune.
Hey girl, you see everything you wanted in a man. You know I gave you the world. You had me in the
It's
palm
quite
of your
clean
hand.
sound in a way.
So why your love went away, I just can't seem to understand. Thought it was me and you, baby, me and you until the end, but I guess I was wrong. Don't wanna think about it, don't wanna talk about it. I'm
I'd say.
Run around, 'cause I know that you're living a lie. That's okay, baby, 'cause in time you will find what goes around, goes around.
You could push that a lot from where we are.
I was like, yeah, this is definitely hitting everything kind of in the clean kind of area, not really adding a ton of bite. But the great part, like you pointed out, is the fact you've got saturation knobs. So if you did want to crank it, you could use those. You could use the headroom controls on the Neve summing. You've got opportunity. You've given yourself a larger kind of play place in a way, gain stage wise, by coming in much more reasonably on all those stems to then add more color or not, depending on what your goal is with the mix. And that's end of the day, what all of us are trying to do here is you don't necessarily want to paint yourself into a corner. The goal is to you want to give yourself the flexibility sonically to create and do whatever you want, especially after tracking.
Yeah, and I would encourage people not to overanalyze it too much. Like Tom's demo was fantastic and gave us a lot of like sort of sound technical foundations. But I think the big takeaway for people is, you don't have to fully understand every single thing Tom said. You can simply just take the net effect of the lesson there is to just sort of learn to read the meters, trust those meters, lean into them, and make them work for you and how you want it to do. But I think the danger there is to overanalyze it and make it too technical. It doesn't have to be. Really.
Never do that.
Yeah. And also, like what I've done there is like deliberately pulled that back to the point where once the drums go to the drum group, that's not really clipping. Like nothing is being pushed into the 32-bit wondrous free headroom. Yeah. They're all operating in what would have been traditional 24-bit, keeping it real. And also the main mix output is not clipping. Like there is no limiter on there shaving off stuff. It is flat up, not clipping anywhere really.
Yeah.
From the drums once in a while in 32-bit. So that's really like, I would say like the cold side of Luna. And to me, the Neve and tape are still making a huge impact sonically when you're hitting them in the cool part, and what's cool about it is, you can see on the bass guitar, that's the heaviest moving needle. And then the vocals are moving quite a bit because they got these nice long wave forms to them, right? But on the drums, like the needles aren't moving too much because they're super quick. So if like Drew says, the one main takeaway is like learn how to watch those meters from a music feel point of view, like the amount of low end moving your mix against the pop. And what I find with that mix is I have finished in Luna, because that I just stemmed out to show kind of like headroom. That's not a Luna mix. Is that I'm way hotter than that into those Neve buses. I'm at least 3 or 4 dB up, and they start to come to life and bloom. And then I think at that point you're going to be, there's so much level coming into the main final mix that Fab's way of having a bus that lets you trim down is or your way, Ben, you were doing it with the limiter, right? The Sonox, you were doing it with the input gain with Greaves. I think both of those ways might be something to experiment with, just to see how far you can push it. Like how fat can you get it? How kind of vibey can Luna be? Or you can keep it pretty neutral if you wish. And I think that's kind of the range, right?
Absolutely.
Hopefully.
Well, nice. Well, guys, man, this was really fun geeking out with you two. We brought on the perfect level of nerdness to. But this is the stuff that we all love, kind of exploring and learning kind of what the boundaries are and what you can do sonically, and yeah, analog summing has been a big one, and more importantly, think about this gain staging and how tape and Neve and clip gain have all these things it all works together, and it's. It's impossible for us to say, here's the one rule, record at this level and you'll be fine, or push into that just doesn't exist. But what we've hopefully done here is shown you some good examples and giving you a good head start on kind of where those levels are, what to be thinking about, what to be looking for, and most importantly, what to be listening for when you're mixing inside a Luna. So yeah, guys, man, thank you so much for putting together these demos, and we just taught that was like a college level course right there on on gain stage and summing. So I hope everybody out there watching and hanging out with us today, hope you guys got some good information and inspiration from today's session, and we'll be back here tomorrow afternoon with Fab, who's going to be taking us even further on the Tales from the Switch. And then we're back Wednesday with Shakir and Thursday with Terry Lewis. So we got a really fun week. So we'll see you guys back here no later than very soon. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.